And secondly, he handed out a copy of Why Didn't They Write? Patient Insights as to the difficulty sometimes of writing that thank you letter to a donor family. A number of years ago, I was on a council for a newsletter for the National Kidney Foundation. And this was something they were discussing. And I said, well, as a patient, let me see if I can do a survey and find out what's going on out there. And so I took this worldwide survey, hundreds of people responded, and condensed it down to the article that you now have. It was very interesting, and I'd say the main thing was most people couldn't find the perfect words to say thanks. And from the donor family side, there was another article that was written from the donor family side, and their message was, just say thank you. Those are the perfect words. And so if you've been one of those that every year writes that letter and then throws it in the can because it's not good enough, believe me, there's a donor family that would love to hear from you, even if they don't reach out and contact you. And that's what today's all about. So with no further ado, introduce Lara Moretti, and Lara will take care of everything from this point on. I'll get this slide for you.
Oh, you're going to, okay. Thanks. I know how to use it. Sorry. Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Oh, there's some feedback there. Okay, maybe I'll move away from those. It's the blue one. That one right there. Okay, thank you. Thanks everybody for having me here. I always enjoy coming and speaking to, I'm hearing feedback. Can we fix that a little bit? Maybe volume. I'm going to try to change that a little bit. Okay, is that a little bit better? People can still hear me? Can you still hear me? Okay, great. So I'm happy to be here today to talk about communicating with donor families in my role at Gift of Life. So I'm also a social worker. I'm a licensed social worker. I've been with Gift of Life since 2003. And my team, we oversee our Family Support Services Department, which is the department that handles all of the bereavement support and grief counseling for families of donors. So we work with families for as long as they need us to work with them, because we recognize that everyone's grief is unique. And we also, another part of our role is we act as a liaison between recipients and those families. And so what that turns into is communication correspondence. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. So today I'm going to talk about kind of these, the who, when, what, how, and why of letter writing. And if, we will have questions at the end, so if you have a question, just hold on to it, because I may get to it in the next slide, but if it's a burning question and you just have to ask, just raise your hand. So let's start with who. Who can write? A lot of people may think that only the recipient can write, and quite truthfully, anyone can write. Anyone in the family can write if you are not ready, because sometimes recipients may not be ready to write themselves, but maybe your spouse or your child or someone in your family may want to express their gratitude, and while you may not be ready, that other member of your family may be, and that's absolutely okay. So if you give permission for someone else in your family to write, they can write. Actually, before I go further, show of hands in the room. Who here has actually written to their donor's family? Oh, wonderful. Okay. And who here has heard from their donor's family? Nice. Okay. All right. So just give me a sense of where everyone is in the process. So anyone in the family can write. We've had letters from children, grandchildren, cousins. We even had a recipient who was a teacher. One of her students wrote. Really, if you are okay with that person writing, we will pass that letter on. When can I write? This is always a big question, and there's sometimes a lot of misconceptions. Sometimes people think, I have to wait for a year. I have to wait for my first anniversary to write. And that's not true. You can write whenever it feels right for you. If that means writing the day after a transplant before you're discharged, great. If it means writing the month after you're transplanted, okay. If it means writing a year or 2 years or 3 years later, that's okay too. So there really is no time frame. We don't delay sending letters to families. We don't wait to send it if it's been a certain period of time. We get a letter, we send it on. So you can write whenever you are ready to write. And that's really the most important thing. When you are ready, or when someone in your family is ready to write, that's the right time. So what kind of things can you write about in your letter? So donor families know very little, if anything, about the recipients of their loved ones' gifts. For privacy reasons, we don't share a whole lot. We will share gender and age range. So they will get a letter from Gift of Life, usually about a week or two after the donation, that will say something like, your loved one's heart went to a man in his 40s. We go on to describe why someone may need a heart transplant. We'll talk about cardiac illnesses and the quality of life when someone is struggling with end-stage heart failure. We don't talk about the specific diagnoses of that recipient because we don't know that at Gift of Life. So we'll give them a sense of why someone might need a heart transplant. But all they will know is your gender and your age range. We don't even give exact ages. We don't give transplant center. We don't give first names. We don't tell them the city where you live because quite honestly, we don't know that. All we know at Gift of Life is we know your name, we know where you were transplanted, we know your gender, and we know your age. We don't have your contact information, and so the only thing we share with families is age range and gender. So the families really don't know very much about you at all. So the letter could be a way for you to introduce who you are and why you needed a heart transplant. How long did you wait? Why you needed that transplant, how your life has changed since getting the transplant. Talk about what your hobbies or your interests are. What are maybe some things that you're hoping to be able to have the energy to get back to doing, the things that you enjoyed before you were sick. You can talk about your family. If you're married, if you have children, if you have grandchildren, if you come from a big family, you have lots of brothers and sisters, those are things that you can share. We do ask that you share only first names for the same reason, for privacy reasons, first names only, and nothing else that's identifying. So not that you got transplanted at HUP. A lot of people know people who work at Penn and you just don't know who might know somebody. So not where you were transplanted, not your address, not your email, not your phone number, just first names. And you may say, well, that's okay. I'm okay if they know all that stuff. But what we don't know is if the family is ready or wants to know all that stuff. So that's why we ask for the communications that are going through Gift of Life and HUP to be without including personal identifying information. So first names only. And of course, this does not have to be in all of this in your first letter. You can start by saying something simple, but these are some ideas for people that people might have to include. I thought what Jim said is really, I hear that a lot, is that people struggle with, finding the perfect words. Because using the word thank you, we say that all the time. I just went to the ladies' room before here and I held the door open for someone and she said thank you. How is that the same words? How can we describe that and use the same words to describe having our life saved? So a lot of people feel like that the words aren't adequate. And to which, if someone called, and I have had these conversations, if someone called me up and said, I just don't know, I just don't have the right words, I just feel like thank you is not enough. I don't know what to write. I say, write that. Write that. I don't feel like thank you is enough. That's very powerful, just that one sentence. It's a powerful way to start the letter. So how do these letters get to the donor families? So when you write that letter, you could either give it to Deb or Sally, or you can send it directly to Gift of Life, either way. If you bring it here to the Transplant Center, they will mail it to us here at Gift of Life. After we get it at Gift of Life, someone on my team, we review the letters. FSS is Family Support Services. That's our department. We're all made up of social workers. We review the letter. We review it just to make sure that there's no identifying information in it. Sometimes people forget and they sign their last name. If there's anything in there that's identifiable, we will redact it. We'll use whiteout and we'll white it out and we make a copy of that because we know that if we just use whiteout, people will scratch that off. And if we use a black marker, people will take that up and put that up to the light. We're on to you. So we will make a copy of it and send that copy to the families. We always keep the original on file. So we send that to the donor family. Typically that is the legal next of kin, so the person who signed the paperwork, the person we worked with at the time of donation, who authorized donation. Sometimes if your heart came from another part of the country and it was not Gift of Life who worked with that family, we will send it to the Gift of Life organization, the other organ procurement organization in the country. There are people like me at all of those organizations, and so I will send it to my peer at that organization. And I do that because I don't have the address of that family, so I need to go through the other organization. We will also then send a confirmation letter back to where we got the letter from. So if you sent it to Deb and Deb sent it to me, I'm sending communication back to Deb that says, hey, I got the letter. We sent it on to the donor's family. If we get any return communication, we will send it back to you. If you send it directly to me and you include your address, then I will send a letter directly back to you to say, hey, Mr. Gleason, we got your letter. We forwarded it on. If we get any return communication, we will send it to you. So we do let it, because we know that people are anxious about it. People want to know that their letter got there, so we send a confirmation letter back, letting people know that it was received and it was sent on. And then we do keep copies on file. We keep copies of everything for a variety of reasons. A lot of times we've had families who have moved and can't find their items, or they've moved and they've wondered if we've sent anything to their old address and they didn't receive it. So we keep copies of things. We've had families who've had floods and their paper in the basement got damaged. So we keep things. We also keep files. So if we get to the point where a family and a recipient are talking about direct communication, it's good for us to have previous history of all the letters back and forth to see what kind of history there was between both parties. So why write? Why write? And I talked a little bit about this, but why is it important to write? So this is, as I said, the family doesn't know very much about you, so this is your way to share something about yourself. It's also a way to express sympathy and gratitude. It's absolutely appropriate to offer condolences, to express sympathy for their loss. I also feel very strongly that writing a letter is an important process of the emotional healing for transplant recipients. Certainly, we think of donor families experiencing an incredible emotional journey. Recipients experience a different type of emotional journey. The juxtaposition, knowing that your life-saving gift came from a family who has experienced a devastating loss, is incredibly emotional. It's huge, and it could take a really long time to come to terms with that. When I was at the Transplant Games, I did a talk about survivor guilt. I think that is a really common occurrence for recipients, knowing that they survived. In order for them to get this gift, someone had to die. We were supposed to have a donor family here with us today. Unfortunately, she is sick, and so she couldn't be here, and she would have talked about that. But the hundreds and hundreds of donor families that I have spoken to over the years, none of them see that their loved one died in order to save a recipient's life. Their loved one died, period, end of sentence. Their loved one was an organ donor and saved someone's life. They didn't die in order to save someone's life. They died and saved someone's life. Families said yes because they wanted another family to not have to experience what their family was experiencing. And so if there's one thing you take away from this, is that to recognize that the families gave you this gift because they wanted you to live and they don't want you to feel guilty. And the process of letter writing is a therapeutic tool that's used in many, many ways, right? How many of us have been, even when we were younger or even as adults, if you're angry at somebody, write a letter, don't send it, write the letter and get those feelings out, right? The act of writing out your thoughts and your feelings is really powerful. And so the act of writing the letter is an important process in helping you process what has happened to you, this enormous gift and what that means. And the more you process it, I think the better stewards we become of these gifts. We can really come to terms with where this gift came from and what the decision this family made, or the decision that the donor made, and the life that we're going to lead as a result of this person's legacy. Why not? Why not? Why do people not write? And so Jim gave you the article. If you haven't read it, then I might be saying some of the things that are in there. But sometimes people aren't ready to write because maybe they're still struggling medically. That happens. It may not even be related to the transplant. It could be something else. And they're struggling medically and they don't feel like they're ready to write. They want to kind of stabilize a little bit with their health concerns. That's okay. And so maybe someone else in the family writes then. That's okay. There's a mix of emotions and the struggling with coming up with the right words. How do I say thank you? How do I come up with the exact words? So one of the things I recommend to folks in thinking about the ways to write, sometimes looking at a blank piece of paper can feel overwhelming, or a blank screen on the computer can feel overwhelming. Sometimes starting with, find a card. A simple, like a sympathy card or a thinking of you card. What's nice about that is the space is limited. And so there's only so much white space that you have to fill up. And so that can feel a little bit less overwhelming, a little bit less challenging, thinking that you have a certain amount of space to fill. And you should also think about the letter as, this isn't the only letter I'm going to write. I don't have to say everything in this one letter. I can start with a simple, shorter message, and then if the family writes back, I can share more the next time. So don't feel like you have to write the great American novel in the first letter. So what about meeting? Everyone is always interested in meeting. How does that happen? So as I've said, everything is confidential. So the letters remain anonymous, so we don't include personal information. So, but if there are several letters written by both the donor family and the recipient, and both people have expressed an interest in communicating directly, because it has to be mutual, then we can start having those discussions. And I know sometimes Deb and Sally have those discussions with you. Sometimes people will call us a gift of life, and we'll have those discussions with them. Just things to think about. Considerations, once this information is out, it can't come back. What are you hoping for in having a direct communication with your family, with your donor family? What are you thinking about? Is this someone you're gonna be Facebook friends with, or you hope to meet them? Do you wanna get together regularly? Just some of the things just to start thinking about what might this relationship look like? Because it's unlike any relationship you'll ever have. And then we do have consent and release forms. It's a form that both the recipient and the next of kin of the family would sign that gives us permission to release the information. We get those, when we get them both back, signed and filled out, we then release the information. And then we can work with the family and the recipient about making those connections. So these are some of the ways to kind of encourage communication. This green brochure that I have on the right side of the screen, I have some of them outside. This is a brochure that we provide all of our transplant center partners with. It's kind of a guideline for communicating with the family of your donor. So please take one with you. We also have this information on our website. And the box that I have at the bottom, right to your donor family here, we started to recognize that people were coming to our website to get information about writing to their donor family. So we included a form. So if you get to the bottom of the page, there's a form that you can fill out all the information and then type in a letter at the bottom. You hit submit. It comes to me in an email. And then I print it out, mostly because we don't have emails of a lot of folks. So we print it out and we'll send that letter on. And so I know for me, it's easier for me to type up my thoughts than to write my thoughts. So that's another way for people to get letters to their donor family. The square we have on the top left corner is a new cover of something we call our recipient kits. I know that this is a new iteration of it, so Deb, I don't know if this design looks familiar to you or not, but we are in the process of renewing that, revising it. These are kits that we give to our transplant partners, and they give them out when recipients are recently transplanted. I don't know when you'd give them out, but if any of you have ever received like the Gift of Life watch, if you've seen those around, that's where that comes from. So we put those together, and there's information in those kits that talk about writing to recipients. What we have learned is that a lot of people, after they get their transplant, have no idea the Gift of Life exists and that we had a part in this gift. So we use these to help educate recipients about the donation and transplantation community and ways that they can get involved and give back, and also communicate with the family of their donor. The elephant in the room, social media. Who here has been, I won't look, and Deb won't look either. Who here has been, a little curious about their donor family and have thought about maybe searching on the internet for them? Thank you for being honest. Yes, it is natural to be curious about your donor family. And we recognize that there is a lot of information out there on social media. In my department, we say that Facebook is not our friend. Because it is amazing the connections that people have. I mean, I've seen it personally. I'm on Facebook. I see one of my friends from college comments on a Facebook post of someone I know from, work, who I worked with 2 jobs ago, and I think, how do these people know each other? They don't even live in the same city. People are connected. And so it is really, can be sometimes kind of easy, and I hope I'm not giving anyone any ideas, but it's natural to want to know more about the family. And we bring it up because what we don't want is for someone to jeopardize a future connection with the donor family by overstepping and reaching out through social media without the family having any communication via Gift of Life and Hub First. You don't necessarily know if you're right. You don't know if the person who's on social media is really the decision maker for this family. Was this the person that was involved? What is their real relationship to the donor? And so if you do a little searching and you're a little curious, then I say talk to Deb or call Gift of Life, and we'll talk to you about how you can write a letter to the right person and get that communication started. It's natural. We understand that people are going to do it, but we just really want people to follow our process so that in the end, you can have a meaningful relationship with this family and not kind of cut it off before it begins. So at this point, I was going to have my colleague, the donor family, Jackie. She is at the end of the picture. This is her family. They came to the Transplant Games with us. Jackie's a donor wife. Those are her children, and her husband's parents are in the middle. Her husband, David, was a multi-organ donor several years ago, and she has had communication with his recipients and how meaningful it was. I think I have a picture of Dave there. Yeah, there's Dave. Dave worked for a tree trimming business, and at work, a limb fell, and he sustained a head injury, and then went on to become brain dead, and he had it on his license, and his family honored his decision, and he became a donor. And I was really hoping she'd be able to be here to talk about it, but I think the salient points are, and I'm not going to do it justice because I'm not Jackie, is how meaningful it was for her family to hear from his recipients. They felt good about him being a donor. They wanted to save lives. He was also a volunteer firefighter, so they knew that this was something he would, they felt confident that this decision he made fit with his personality. But hearing from the recipients really reinforced that they did the right thing, that this was a good thing. It doesn't take away their grief, but it is the little bit of good that came out of something so terrible. And she's a very active speaker for us. She loves to tell his story. She loves to meet recipients. It's very fulfilling for her. It's a wonderful way for the family to stay connected to David in a really positive way. All right, so now I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. So we have Tom, Melissa, and Bob. And I'm going to give them some time to tell their story and share with everybody about their story. So we'll start with Tom. Here. I'm gonna do this. Is that okay?
Okay, sure.
Be a little fresh. This is why I don't do AV. Okay, try talking now.
Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Thomas Jones Brown. I'm 69 years old. And I'm going to give you a little bit about my background. I came from a family of 4 kids. My oldest brother, James, my oldest sister, Sybil, and then me, and then my younger brother, Willie. Excuse me. Heart disease and diabetes and strokes and high blood pressure run in the family. My mother died of all 4. She was only 56 years old. My father died about 4 years later of different complications, but yet still he died. Alcohol was part of his problems after my mother died. Let me see. My brother James, the oldest, he died 3 years ago of heart failure and Agent Orange. He was in the service, and he caught Agent Orange overseas. And with that and complications of the heart, he died 3 years ago. Yeah, my brother Willie, he died about 20 years ago in New York. He was started dealing with drugs, and he got hooked, and he died from that, very young. But anyway, I have two daughters, Sarita right here, and I have one, Danielle, that's in North Carolina, and those are my two grandkids over there, right, which I never would have saw if I hadn't have got this transplant, right? I was married to Christine, my wife. We were married for 30 years or so, and she got really sick, right, really sick, and so she couldn't work anymore. So I started working two full-time jobs, and I was working 16 hours a day, right, and helping to take care of Sarita and Chris. This is sort of emotional. I didn't want it to be, but it is. But anyway, I started with the junk food. I went from 170 pounds in a few years to over 300 pounds of junk food because I was working and it was easy. You could get 2 cheeseburgers, French fries, soda, and ice cream for $5 at McDonald's. And that's what I was doing, so I just blew up, right? And then about 2008, 2009, I got really sick. And my daughter sent me to my doctor sent me to the hospital to find out what was going on because I was having some chest pain and I couldn't hardly breathe, right? And come to find out I was having congestive heart failure. At this time, like I said, I was 300 pounds. And I didn't know exactly what was gonna happen to me or anything. But I was in the hospital from 2010, of the first 2009, November 2009, all through 2010 to January 2011, I got my heart transplant. And I got it from a 20-year-old. I'll talk about that later, but from a 20-year-old. But in the meantime, I got kidney failure. So I had to go on dialysis for 5 years. And then in 2016, I was able to get a kidney transplant. So now I'm sitting here with a 29-year-old heart and a 38-year-old kidney in my 69-year-old body. Excuse me, I get a little emotional thinking about this stuff. Sometimes I don't even know why I'm still here. But anyway, it was a hard struggle for my daughter here, Sarita. Because she had to deal with everything when I was in the hospital for that year. Her and Whitney, my daughter-in-law over here, Whitney is a nurse practitioner here in the baby department. So between them, they really took care of me and made sure I was doing the right things and took care of me while I was in the hospital. And then when I went home and I was on dialysis. You know, it was pretty difficult. I lost, like I said, down to 133 pounds. I couldn't walk. I had to go through all kinds of therapy. It took a long time for me to just to be able to stand or to walk or with a walker or a wheelchair or anything. But I managed to get through that somehow, with God's blessing, I guess. Yeah. But my donor's family, Dan and Jan and Colleen, we're very close. They are like my family. They came here to visit me, and they stayed here for 4 days. They wanted a Philly cheesesteak. They're from Ohio. Yeah, and that's what they wanted, Philly cheesesteak. So they stayed here with us for 4 days. Very good family. We're to this day, I just talked to them last night, and they will see this. I don't know what I would do without these people. They are so close to me. It's unreal. Like the family that I lost, I gained another family. Yeah, because the only people left now is just my sister. I'm 69, and my sister, Sybil, she's 71. She lives in North Carolina. Right? One of the things I wanted to talk about with Dan and Jan and Colleen was, when I was talking to them last night, one of the things that the family said, that the recipients sometimes forget about the siblings. And I realized that I had pretty much done the same thing. I mean, I think the whole family, I thank the whole family, and it's always about the whole family, but I didn't go deep enough to think about Colleen. And it was just the two of them, brothers and sisters. So she lost her brother. And that was very hard for her, and it's still very hard for her, not having a brother. And one of the things I wanted to mention is when they were getting ready to leave, we were sitting in my daughter's living room, and the mother asked, excuse me, if she could put her head on my chest so she could hear her son's heart beat. So she did. And she started crying, and I was crying. The whole place was crying. And that was like monumental to me, for her feeling like that. But that's a great family. I mean, when the son died at 20, they gave his organs away to 4 different people. I was just the recipient of the heart. They gave kidneys to someone in Pittsburgh, and somebody in Virginia got something, and I can't remember, but Maryland, I think, was the other one. But that's the kind of family, donor family, that they were. They believed in that, and I wish I could be able to. I was a donor, but I can't donate now. I can't do that now, so I feel bad about that. But like I said, it's been pretty rough when you think about where I came from, and to now. I think about all of the situations that I had put myself in, and I don't really know why I'm here now, to tell you the truth, except for believing, and for this donor family, which came through, and after being in the hospital for close to 13 months, and to come from 300 to 133 pounds, it was rough. But I think that's pretty much where I want to stop right there. But thank you.
I'll take this off of you. Before I introduce Melissa, I'm just going to let you know that you can still be a donor. You can. You might be able to be a tissue donor. Corneas, skin, bone, veins, so don't count yourself out. Yeah. I mean, but hopefully you're going to be here for a really long time, and you'll be really wait. You'll be over the age limit, but I'm not trying to rush things or anything like that. Yeah. Do we want to try this?
Sure.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Put this here.
Leave that there.
Yeah. I'm gonna. Sorry.
Totally fine. Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa. I received 2 heart transplants, one when I was 7 and one was when I was 25. And I've been lucky enough to meet both of my donor families. So I was diagnosed with cardiomyopathy when I was 2.5. I lived a pretty normal life up until I was about 7, and I went into heart failure, and then I was listed. I waited for 5 weeks at Children's Hospital. And received my donor heart. And we didn't know it at the time, but my cardiomyopathy was actually genetic because a few years after my transplant, my brother also received a heart transplant for the same reason. So I did very well. I left the hospital within a week after my transplant. And I know that my family, my parents wrote my donor family a few times. And when I was old enough, I think I was about 8, so it was a year after my first transplant, I wrote them a letter as well. Of course, it was very brief. I was just learning to read and write. But it was me thanking them. And I met my donor family in a kind of a roundabout way, a little bit different than we're talking here today. In 1997, when I did get my transplant, it was right around when the internet was very popular. And my cousin had made me a website with my story. And Queen Latifah at the time had a talk show. So Queen Latifah's producers contacted my parents and asked if we wanted to go on air and meet my donor's family. So of course my parents said yes, and I guess they had contacted my donor's family and asked the same. So that's how I had met my first donor family. It was on air on Queen Latifah talk show. And you can still see the segment on YouTube. It's a little embarrassing because I had puffy prednisone cheeks and my hair was very crazy the way they did my hair in the salon there. But yes, so I did meet my first donor family that way. We'd only met one time, but we've been friends on Facebook. We have stayed in touch through the years. My donor was a little girl named Bridget. She was 8 years old. She had undiagnosed diabetes, so that's how she passed away. And Dora is the mother's name. Dora also has diabetes and helps out with a few different camps that serve children that have diabetes. So this year we've planned, I also have diabetes from the transplant medicine. So this year we've planned that I will go down to Alabama where she lives and help her out with one of her camps that she does. So I'm excited for that. And I had Bridget's heart for 18 years. We'll probably get a little emotional here, but it was really nice to know who Bridget was and be able to tell her story. She was with me through all of my accomplishments, going to college, graduating college, getting my master's degree. I started teaching, and it was just really nice to know that all of that was made possible through Bridget and Dora's decision to donate her organs. And so when I went into heart failure again at age 25, it was obviously devastating. I knew that going into this process again and needing to wait on the list and having my transplant and recovery, I was okay with all of that. I had already been through it. I knew what to expect. I think the hardest for me was knowing that I wasn't going to have Bridget's heart anymore. That's what really got me. But being able to speak to Dora, Bridget's mom, and talk to her about, you know, all the things that she made possible for me through those years was really helpful. So I did get my second transplant, and it was strange to know that I might not know my second donor, knowing that I knew everything about Bridget and her young life. So I woke up from transplant, started sitting up, finally had enough consciousness to know that I wanted to write my donor's family right away. So I requested my laptop, and I remember my mom sat it up right in front of me. I was still in the hospital bed, and I logged onto the Gift of Life website and searched around the website, like you had said earlier, Lara, and filled in the requested information. I think it was what hospital, what organ, the date, and things like that. And then I just started typing. I didn't really put much thought into it before. I just sort of wrote my feelings down on the paper, or on the computer, I guess I was typing. And what I wrote in the letter was, of course, thank you. That thank you wasn't enough, obviously. I told them a little bit about myself, the life that their loved one saved. And that I had known my first donor family. I let them know this was my second transplant. And I let them know that it would be amazing to be able to know my donor's name and to be able to carry on my donor's story and their legacy, similar to the way I did with Bridget's legacy and her heart. And I sent it off. And I waited for about 6 months. So I was at home at this point. I had kind of figured I wasn't going to hear anything, you know. I didn't know how long to wait or to expect something. So I was very surprised when I got the letter from Gift of Life in the mail that contained a letter from my donor's family. It was from my donor's older sister. My donor's name was Chrissy. She was 30 years old, and she had 2 young daughters. And bless my donor sister's heart, her heart, she wrote all about my donor. Little tidbits of my donor's life, what she was like, where she worked. She worked as a dental assistant, and it was amazing. And that letter made me feel fulfilled, and I was able to continue to tell Chrissy's story and how Chrissy saved my life. And of course, I wrote a letter back, and we started communicating back and forth, and eventually started talking about meeting up. And that's when Gift of Life had sent us both, I guess, forms to fill out about our information, and we signed off on it. And a few days after I had sent that letter back to the Gift of Life, I had received a friend request from my donor's brother, who I had not heard from before. And then shortly after that, it was a bunch of friend requests on Facebook from all of her siblings. She had a pretty big family. So it was probably about 3 months after that, we had planned a meetup. They live in Reading, Pennsylvania, and they all have children. So we wanted to pick a place that was child-friendly. So we went to a place, I forget what it was called, but it was similar to Dave & Buster's. And it was perfect because we could sit down and we could talk and we could have that emotional part of the meet up, and then we could go and play games and sort of get our minds off of the emotional aspect of it, and the kids could have some fun. And of course, I got to meet my donor's daughters. They're precious. They are 5 and 7 now. And it was amazing to be able to know them and get to know them. And that was about a year ago. And just a few weeks ago, I work at the Please Touch Museum, and my donor sister, Sherry, brought my donor's little girls to the museum, and it was great to just be able to run around and play with them and just experience that. Yeah. You're welcome.
Okay,
My turn.
your turn. There you go.
Okay. Hello, my name is Bob Kurek, and a little bit of background on me. I grew up in New Jersey. I have 2 brothers, and unfortunately, our dad had passed away at the age of 47, and we were just little kids. So, and then also in my mom's family, all the men died early of heart troubles. So always in the back of my mind, I always knew. So one good thing was I took good care of myself. I was always healthy, conscious, and things like that. But at the age of 45, I had my first heart attack in 2000. I had a heart attack, and unfortunately, I was on the basketball court, and they took me to the wrong hospital, and I was just having a heart attack. So they say time is tissue, so I had a lot of damage, and I ended up with the ventricular tachycardia. So anyhow, we went through the process. The docs did a good job with me. They implanted a defibrillator, 2, one first, and then they changed it to a 3-wire. And I think that was really hard because, excuse me, I got shocked 15 times back to life, and that was really hard. So things just got worse. Things just got worse, and finally I get on the transplant list, and I was kind of apprehensive about that with having a defibrillator, being on the list. I just was really unsure about that. So I prayed on it a lot, and the Lord basically told me, just trust me and go ahead with this. And 3.5 months after that, the transplant called me, It was on a Friday night, and I'll never forget it, So I had the transplant in June of 2013, and everything went great. I was really happy to get rid of the defibrillator, of course. And so then right away I started writing. I knew I wanted to thank someone. I was so blessed and so happy to have a new heart. So I did write right away, and it's a hard letter to write because you're writing a thank you letter and you're writing a sympathy letter. It's kind of in between there, and it's very difficult. But hey, I figured I'd just go for it, and I hadn't heard back. And 3 years went by, still hadn't heard back. So I was kind of frustrated because I really wanted to thank someone. I felt like there was just a white page here that that this heart came from somewhere, and I don't know, and I can't thank them, So, and then in the process, my daughter had gotten married, so I sent them a picture of me walking my daughter down the aisle, which was something that I never thought I'd be able to do. And I kept asking, like, I had friends that had lost children and family members, and I said, by me writing, am I hurting them? I didn't want to hurt anybody. So they said, no, Bob. They said, there's not a day goes by when they forget. So by you writing, just keep writing. So 3 years later, I remember Deb calling me, and she said she got a letter, and I didn't know how to react, Deb. I was floored. Never forget it. And so the husband, he wrote to me. Andreina, she was married twice, and this was her second husband that had called me, and he was actually moving to Barcelona, Spain. So before he left the States, he wanted to see me. So I've come to find out my heart came from Miami, and so we planned a meeting, and I flew there, and it was very emotional, of course, and I got down there, and he said, I don't know if I can do. He said, I don't know if I can do this. I'm saying, well, I'm here, let's try to do this, So, and then so we met at the hotel in the lobby there, and we spent a couple hours just talking and crying and things. And he had gone through a major depression after Andreina had passed away, and then on Monday he said, well, we can meet her daughter, and so Monday came, and her name is Daniela, and she wasn't showing up, and it was like, oh, here we go again. I really wanted to meet her and thank her. So finally she did. We met at a restaurant, and it really was very emotional. And Tom, she wanted to listen to her mom's heart, which was very, very difficult. I couldn't even look at her. She put her head on my chest, and I just couldn't look at her because I'd be going bawling my eyes out also. So anyhow, so now that I have gotten to know them, Danielle was an only child, and I realized how hard it was for her to give up her mom's organs, especially being alone. Like if you have brothers and sisters, you can kind of talk about it and things. But she had to do this on her own, and so I can appreciate all that she went through, and now our relationship is great. She wanted to come down to meet my family. She moved to New York now, and so she wanted to meet my family. So we did meet, and we met to dinner and spent the day together. And she's really happy about all that. But I just let the relationship develop on her speed. I don't push her. Like I'll message her or whatever, and sometimes she gets back right away. Sometimes she waits. But she's very happy, that I have her mom's heart. And but it's still difficult for her. So it's just another blessing on top of the blessing. Her mom's donated her heart to me, and now I have a new family. I feel like she's another daughter to me, and we have a nice relationship, and hopefully it'll build in the future. And I'm just so glad that I wrote, and I'm just so glad that I was persistent in keeping writing, because that was hard, keeping writing, because I didn't know whether they wanted to hear those, to receive those letters or not. So, but I'm glad I did, and now it's just a blessing on top of a blessing. So thank you.
Thank you. So what, if I stand here, can you hear me? Yes? Okay. So one of the things I wanted to elaborate what I heard Bob saying was, he'd written and he hadn't written, no one had written back. And Melissa waited about 6 months, but maybe if it had been longer, she might have wondered, can I write again? And that's a question I get a lot from families. Can we write again if we haven't heard? And, I say yes, if there's something else you want to say, it's okay to write again. If we would ever hear from the donor family that they didn't want a letter, which is very rare, in my 15 years of doing this, I can think of maybe on one hand the number of families that have said, we just don't want to know, we just don't want to hear anything. Out of the hundreds and hundreds, if we ever got that kind of communication, we would communicate that to Deb, so you would know there's maybe is a reason that they're unable to respond. Or if someone has moved and we don't have a current address and we can't forward the letters, we would also let you guys know that, so you didn't think they weren't responding for a reason. And we hold on to those letters. Like I said, we keep copies of everything. So if the family does contact us and says, this is our new address, has there been any correspondence over the last 5 years, we will have it and we will share it at that point. So, I think, as I imagine most of you can recognize, there's a lot going on for families, maybe why they're not writing back. Sometimes it's too emotional. Sometimes it's just they are trying to get back to a new normal and they have so much going on that they're just not, they don't have the energy or the time to sit down and write. It doesn't mean they don't greatly appreciate hearing. So if you've written and you haven't heard back, and it's been, I would give people 6 months because there is a little bit of a time lag. You give it to Deb, Deb gives it to me, we review it, we mail it, right? So it's not like 2 days later. It may take about 2 weeks for your letter to get to where it needs to go. And then, of course, people take time to write, and then the reverse, getting it back. But if it's been 6 months and you haven't heard and you want to write again, you want to just send a simple note that you're still thinking of the family, and you continue to pray for them or think of them every day or whatever. It doesn't have to be a long letter, but just let them know you're still thinking of them. It's totally okay to do that. Don't feel, if it doesn't have to be 6 months, but I would give people 6 months. And then if you haven't heard, if you want to write again, you absolutely can. Tom, I don't know if I heard in your story, when did you first write to the family?
Well, I want to thank Deb for that, because she orchestrated the whole thing. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think we can hear you. Yeah.
Orchestrated the whole thing between me and the family. And they wanted to meet me as much as I wanted to meet them.
Okay.
So we started out writing a few times, and then we started talking on the phone.
Right.
And then they said they wanted to come here to personally meet me
Okay.
and my family. So that's what they did.
Sure. And who wrote? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We've been very tight since then.
Yeah. And did you write the first letter, or did they write the first letter? Do you recall?
I might have wrote the first letter. I'm not sure. I can't remember. I think I wrote it, and Deb, it went to the Tree of Life or something. Is that the way it went?
It went to me, probably.
Oh, to you?
Yeah.
Oh,
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the way
I turned it off because it was making feedback.
Yeah. Oh, okay. But yeah, that's the way that went.
Okay.
And we've been very tight ever since. We're real close. Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for me or the panelists? I have questions I can ask them, but I wanted to open up to everyone here now. Questions. Bill will find you with a mic so everyone can hear. Anyone have questions? Johan in the front.
Have any of you had any regrets of doing what you did to contact the families? Second thoughts, problems along the way?
No, I don't have any regrets. I think in contacting, I can grab this. I think in contacting my donor's family, my second donor, I didn't ever have thoughts to meet them. I wouldn't be opposed to meeting them, but I never wrote them to want to meet them. I wrote them to thank them and to know, if they felt that they wanted to share who my donor was so I could continue to tell my donor story. And now that I know and I can feel my heart beating and I know who that heart is from, it's very fulfilling for me. So I don't have any regrets in that matter. Did you guys want to say anything?
Yeah, I have no regrets also. As I said before, my friends keep saying, keep writing, keep writing, keep writing. It was frustrating for me, but I did keep writing, and I'm glad I did. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also want to point out that, the experience that Tom and Melissa and Bob have about meeting their donor's family is more the exception than the rule. And I love, Melissa, how you just said that you didn't write with the intent to meet. You wrote to express your gratitude, to express your sympathy, and to get to know, hopefully, more about the donor. And I think that is the great perspective, that's the great attitude to have when writing, because not everyone gets to that point. And there's a lot of reasons why, in the simplest form, we have to have letters back and forth from both sides. And there have to be a couple of letters back and forth on both sides. And both sides have to want to have that direct communication. And it's not for everybody. It's not for every recipient, and it's not for every donor family. So writing a letter does not always mean you will meet, and that's okay, because it's not. It shouldn't be the goal, but it can be a result, but it's not always the result. We have a question in the back.
Has there ever been, I guess, a scary moment as far as, and this, I guess, towards you?
Okay.
Has there ever been a scary moment to where families meet, but then something like bad happens or awkward happens, or that kind of affects the whole, I guess, the gist of why we have to write letters and everything now instead of just meeting?
I haven't thankfully had anything bad happen. I think more there may be just different perceptions of what the relationship would turn out to be. So we have people write letters so it moves slowly. So people on both sides can really figure out what they're hoping to happen with this relationship. And even when the information is exchanged, I still advise people to take it slow. Sometimes when you get that information, you think, okay, now we have to meet. And I advise folks to still take it slow. I use the analogy of dating because, it's not really the same, but that's the only thing that's close. If you're going to go out on a date, and one is a blind date where you really don't know much about the person versus a date where you've exchanged some texts and some emails and maybe talked on the phone, which date is going to be hopefully more meaningful and a better date? It's probably the one where you've had a chance to build a relationship with that person. And so that's the analogy I use for recipients and donor families when they are at that point of exchanging information, but kind of continuing to build that relationship before ultimately meeting. Thankfully, I haven't heard of any major mishaps, but I think there is the chance of people having different ideas of what are the next steps. And so moving slowly, you doing the letters through Gift of Life and HUP, and then if you're exchanging information, still moving slowly, allows you both to feel out what is going to be best for the two of you. Great question. Any other questions? We have one up here in the front. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you, or you had the mic.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
When somebody dies, who decides?
Closer to the mic.
When somebody dies,
Yes.
who decides if they're going to be a donor? And let's say somebody passes away and wants to be a donor, so it's on your license.
Yeah.
Does the family, can they step in and say, no, we don't want that? How does that work?
So
Is the family always in favor of this? That's what I'm asking.
So great question. It is a law in every state in the United States that when someone dies, the hospital has to notify the Gift of Life organization, and that's in that state. And
What if the person who dies didn't say they wanted to be a donor?
yes, I'm getting it. So, and actually, most people don't have it on their driver's license. In Pennsylvania, we're at about 45% of everyone who has a driver's license has donor designation on their license. So there are more people who don't have it than do have it. And there are actually more of our donors don't have it on their license. We're hoping, so if you have it on your license,
there are certain people at Gift of Life that have access to the DMV registry. It's password protected. I don't have access to it. There's only certain people in our clinical team, when they get that referral from the hospital, they're able to look it up and they can see if someone had it on their license or if they don't have it on their license. And that is going to impact the conversation we have with the family. The family is always involved in the process because we need medical and social history from them. If you've donated blood and you get all these questions about travel and all kinds of things, we ask similar questions about the donor. We have to ask the family about that. So we need family involvement. Most families, when they find out that their loved one made that decision on their own, they are absolutely supportive of it. They are relieved that they don't have to try to guess what their loved one wanted, and they are empowered to know that they can fulfill their loved one's decision, that this is something they can do for them. Sometimes when there's family hesitation, it's because there's some myths and misconceptions. And so we will work with them to see what are they concerned about. They think maybe they can't have an open casket funeral, or they think that the funeral will be delayed, or they think that their faith didn't support it. When we can have conversations and talk to the family about this, often their questions are answered and their hesitation is removed. Legally, a driver's license it's a legal document, and so that is a determination by the donor. There have been times where families are in opposition, and we will work with the hospital administration to move forward on those cases. But it's very rare. Most families are really happy and relieved to know that their loved one made that decision.
You can pretty much assume if you got a heart, that family was supportive of that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
And I guess if someone wasn't supportive of that, the family, you wouldn't pass on a letter, which would only cause them a problem, right?
Yeah, I mean, if the family said we don't want any contact, but I mean, it's so rare. I would have a hard time thinking of people where that would be a situation. Yeah. Another question. Yes.
Hi.
Get to you. We won't forget you.
I just wanted to ask, like you were saying, as far as the donor families, that they're given a date range, an age range, and the sex of the
Yes.
heart. How, as a donor, is that not information? How come we can't get that information as the recipient?
Yeah,
rather?
well, that would be, every transplant program has its own policies.
Oh, okay.
So I can't speak for what HUP's policy is, but I think it's probably from a.
Oh, so it's hospital based then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So then he can eat an extra cookie at lunch. Yes.
Thank you. My question is directed at you. I'm just getting ready to meet my donor.
Okay.
I'm dealing with the New Jersey Sharing Network
Okay.
as well as you guys. I was talking to the young lady from that network the other day. She's filling me in a little bit about the family and conversations that she's had. They're very anxious to meet me. I was shocked when she told me that they really promote these kind of things because they only have 2% of the families and the recipients actually meet. That seemed like an awful low number. It kind of shocked me.
Yeah, I don't have numbers exactly, but it is low. I mean, I think last year, Gift of Life had about maybe 35 pairs of donor family members and recipients get to the point of direct communication. And we have, oh my God, probably like 1,100 letters that come through my office every year. So now that's not 1,100 pairs, but so it's rare because, you know, not everyone hears back, not everyone writes, not everyone is emotionally at that point. So it is rare. It is rare. It's kind of not what People Magazine might make you think, or the representation on this panel, but it is pretty rare. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Any other questions for me or the panel? Yes. Hold that thought, because we all want to hear it.
You may have already went over this. I came in a little late, so my apologies if you did. But so this is more of a question for educating my patients when they come in. Is there a wait period after the recipient receives the heart that they have to reach out to the donor, and who would they reach out to?
Right. So the short answer is no. There is no wait period. They can write whenever. They don't have to wait 6 months. They don't have to wait a year. Melissa wrote, she was still in the hospital and she wrote. So whenever they're ready. And they would send the letter either directly to Gift of Life or they would give it to Deb or Sally, the social workers in the program. Are you with the Heart program? Yeah. Oh, okay. So yeah, they would give it to either Deb or Sally, one of the social workers, and they would get it to Gift of Life. Yes. Yes.
Hi. I wrote my letter to my donor about within 3 to 4 months after transplant. Transplant was on Father's Day in 2011, and I did not receive a response. But when I was writing the letter, I remember talking to Deb and Sally saying, of all the communications I'm involved with, it was one of the easiest letters to write because it gave me the opportunity to really talk about how meaningful it was that I was able to write the letter.
Right, yeah.
So I wasn't worried about what it looked like or what it sounded like. In fact, I don't think there was any edits. It was one of those, great letters. But I can say that coming here today has inspired me to reach out again.
Good.
Because I think what I realized, and I've had this conversation with numerous friends, family, what have you, and they ask me, do you know who your donor family is? And I try to explain what the process is. Mm-hmm. Have you written a letter? Yes, I wrote a letter, did not receive a response. And the way I described it was that it was so meaningful to me, obviously, but you don't know what's going on with the recipient, with the donor family.
True. You don't.
They lost someone. And sometimes, in my case, it was a young man. I don't know anything really about the family, but there was a lot of grieving there, and perhaps they weren't prepared. But it gave me this great opportunity to, when I wrote the letter, and I think now, 7 years later, I can share with them all the things that
absolutely
that it allowed me to realize.
Yeah, right,
So,
and they're most definitely at a different place than 7 years later.
Yeah.
The grief is not gone, but they're in a different place, and they may be ready to write at this point. I mean, they may be thinking, "Oh, I'd like to write, but I haven't heard from him. I hope he's okay." Right? And they often we have donor families who call us who haven't heard from a recipient who are still very curious to know how they're doing. So I may work with Deb to either have her talk to encourage the recipient to write, or she'll try, she'll speak to the recipient and say, the family's interested in knowing how you're doing. Can I give them an update? And so we'll give updates because the families are curious. They gave these gifts because they wanted people to live the best life that they could. And knowing that that's very different for every single person. So great. I look forward to getting that letter at my desk.
You will, within a week.
Oh, within a week. All right.
Thank you.
Any other questions for me or the panel?
I wanted to share a story. Oh,
And I think we have a few more minutes left. So if you're thinking of a question, don't hold back.
I just wanted to mention to Tom, you said a couple times you don't know why you're the one that received the heart. I was the same way. My donor was in her 40s. She had 2 young children. I myself, my 2 daughters are already grown and have their own lives, and I couldn't understand why a 40-year-old woman would die and I'm still here. And I came to the conclusion that, and because someone said this to me, that God is not done with me yet. There's something he wants me to do, and I found out what it is, and I'm doing it. So search your heart. Don't feel don't feel bad about it. There is a plan, and there was a reason, and that's what I hang on to. God bless you, sir.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's really powerful and really speaks to, I think, what a lot of recipients struggle with is why me? Why not the other person who was waiting? Why was that donor's life over and mine was not? And she had a good life and she deserved to live. All those things. And, we all know that life isn't fair and we may not always understand the reasons for things. But the families wanted another family to not have to experience what they're experiencing. That's the bottom line. You have another question, or did you want to?
I just wanted to finish up with a neat little way that I ended up writing my letter. So I put a pen to paper numerous times, and it just never sounded right. And before, I guess maybe I was 6 months out, I got involved with Team Philadelphia through Gift of Life for the Transplant Games. And we had our first team meeting, and I sat at a table, and of course, part of the team are donor families. And I sat next to a woman who was a donor wife, and she had not heard back from any of the recipients from her loved one's organs. So I thought, wow, I'm at this stage where I want to write the letter. So we ended up talking, and I said, would you help me write my letter? And she happened to live in a couple towns over from me. We got together for breakfast, and we just talked through things. So I got to meet a donor family that didn't hear from a recipient. I'm getting ready to write to my donor family. So it was a perfect match. She was able to put together in words a letter that she was hoping to hear from her recipient and never did. So it was very therapeutic for Leah Zenker is her name to help me with that. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I forgot that Leah helped you with that. That sounds very much like Leah.
Could I just say one more thing?
Absolutely. Let's do it in the mic.
This one? Okay. To show you how close that my donor family and I were, they sent me a book of Daniel. Yeah, and it's from when he was first born all the way up to when he took his life. Yeah, you guys back there can't see it, but it's 21 years of pictures, pretty much. That's him when he was a baby, right? Yeah, so that showed you how close knit this family is and how close we are together. Our families are just entwined now. We are one. I just want to show that and pass that on.
I mean, that says to me that this is a family that is happy that you got this gift and that they are sharing their son and brother with you, and that they're happy to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Okay, last chance for any questions before we close it up and I give it back to Jim. Okay. Yes, okay. We have.
That's really special.
We need to give you the mic. Come on, Bill. We're not done yet.
I have pictures that my donor sister sent to me through Facebook. I printed them out, but I forgot to bring them here. But that's really special. All those photos.
I'm kind of at I just received my heart maybe about 2 weeks ago.
Wow. Congratulations.
I'm really everything moves so fast. I'm kind of stuck right now. I'm in between crying and it's crazy. But it stuck with me so much. So it seemed like I have to find out who this person that is a part of me now. You know what I mean? It's biting at me. So it's like, man, I guess I'd have to go through that. Or I didn't know if, even if there's an inkling of information I can find out about him or her or whatever, however, it's hard to sleep. You know what I mean?
Work with Deb or Sally and put some of that down on paper and get that, and that'll get to us. Okay. And then, the family will know that you want to know about their loved one. And hopefully they'll be able to respond with some information that'll help kind of give you some more information so you have that fuller story. And it may come in little bits. It may not come all in that first letter, but maybe you'll get a name or you'll know the relationship, and that'll be a little bit more that you could hold with you as you heal physically and emotionally. But put those thoughts down and let the family know that you want to know. Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You look great. All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Stay right there in the seat.
Okay.
Okay.
You can see me.
I don't know about you, but when I come to these meetings, this is what it's all about. It's inspiring. Every one of your stories is so unique, and yet when you hear others, you're empowered to do things like write to a donor that you may have been reticent to do because it wasn't perfect, etc. And so you go away from these with so many stories and so much inspiration. As I said up front, but for those who came in late, every one of these presentations is recorded and part of Transplant Recipients International Organization, TRIO, website has links to all of these presentations. And this one will be up there by next week. And so trioweb.org is the website. And under resources, you'll find the transplant presentation library with all these, including Lara's presentation back in 2013.
This one was better. Yeah.
It's amazing how things progress. The other thing that we're doing right now is we're focused on raising awareness of the higher risk of cancer post-transplant. As a transplant recipient, between the immune suppressions, advancing age, both in terms of years post-transplant, and your physical age, you are at a higher risk. Our program here is very good in terms of keeping you aware of that. Not every program is. And so TRIO has a 5-year program to develop awareness in patients so that you can, one, find cancers early and get them treated, skin cancer being the most common, and we have great programs here to deal with that. And part of that is this this post-transplant cancer website that we have, which is still underway. But a lot of the videos we do are part of the information out there. So by all means, if you go to trioweb.org, under resources, a link to another website, which is this one here. And I strongly encourage you to go there and find out what it is you need to look out for. The inspiration we walk away with today is basically, I want to live until I die. Transplants do not defeat death. You're still going to die someday, so am I. But today we're alive. Next week we're hopefully alive. And I'm going to tell you, looking back 25 years out of transplant, it's awesome. And I know you feel the same way, whether it's 2 weeks, a year, 10 years, 20 years, whatever. And so plan what you're going to do with that gift of the life that a donor family has made possible for you. I want to give a special thank you to both Lara Moretti and Lara. Here's a book that I think you'd enjoy. Things That Grab Your Heart and Won't Let Go. Okay?
Thank you. Because I don't have any of those stories at work every day. I can cry some more. Yeah. We cry a lot at my office. We do.
And that's good because she's so engaged with what's going on.
Thank you.
And for our panelists, I'm going to do the same thing. Bob?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Melissa? Tom? Thank you very much for sharing your stories. I'm going to give you one other story. I do a lot of presentations and I have some slides of people's stories to raise awareness of organ donation. And in those slides, I have this young girl who back in the mid-90s at the Transplant Games, her mother came up and said, Jim, would you help me? She is so scared and you can help her. Little did she know how scared I was because I was about to enter a swimming competition and afraid that I was going to drown. But I had to buck it up because this little girl, Melissa, I have slides of her life from back in those days right up through recently, including her brother's slides. And it is an amazing family story that really touches a lot of lives out there. So Melissa, you have been an inspiration for me all these years. And I got to tell you, is she the most beautiful advertisement for a heart transplant you've ever seen?
Thank you. I went on to win the bronze medal in the backstroke, and then I think I won a gold in relay backstroke. So thank you.
If I had thought ahead, I would have had those slides here to show you what she looked like back then and over the years. Secondly, I'd like to say a special thank you to our amazing social worker team and the heart team all together. So if those who are still here could just stand up for 1 minute to be recognized. Thank you. These programs are the people that make us who we are today. And, the surgery is a big part of it, but it's the ongoing challenge of life. And if you haven't taken advantage of the resources of especially the social workers here, and you have an issue, don't be shy. They'll give you their heart. And so, in closing, one last thing. If you haven't already seen Bill, and I've got it up here now, so if you haven't already checked in your phone number, your email address, so we can contact you with announcements of these programs, I have that up here. You should have gotten a parking voucher if you came in late. Maybe you didn't. You want to see Sally for that. Our presentations, as I said, are on YouTube. You can search on them. Enjoy the luncheon, and by all means, don't sit with your favorite friend. Reach out to somebody you don't know. There are some amazing stories out here, okay? And finally, we've got the holiday party coming up December 10th, that evening. You'll be getting notices for that. And also, the next transplant event you should put on your calendar is Friday, March 8th, 2019. It'll be on mental health issues of transplant patients. Do we have any mental health issues? Yes. Well, our speakers are the right people to talk to about that. And so with that, lunch is served. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Turn off your mic.